From Sugar Ray Robinson's nightmare that predicted tragedy, to Mike Tyson's descent into literal savagery, to Gerald McClellan waking up blind and paralyzed, these are the 20 moments that made boxing fans question everything about the sport they love. Let's start with a knockout that literally shook the entire boxing world and made everyone question what they just witnessed. Juan Manuel Marquez KO Manny Pacquiao. Look, if you were watching this fight live, you probably remember exactly where you were sitting. December 8th, 2012, the fourth meeting between these two legendary warriors. Pacquiao was doing Pacquiao things, throwing those blistering combinations that made him a global superstar, controlling the fight like the pound-for-pound king he was supposed to be. Everything was going according to plan. And then round 6 happened, and everything we thought we knew about Manny Pacquiao got completely rewritten in the span of about half a second. Half a second. See, Pacquiao had this habit of lunging forward aggressively. It's what made him special, that fearless, almost reckless commitment to offense. But Juan Manuel Marquez, that man had been studying those lunges for literal years across 4 fights. So when Pacquiao came flying in at the end of round 6, Marquez was ready with the most perfectly timed right counter you'll ever see. The punch snapped Pacquiao's head back so violently that his body just folded like someone had cut his strings. He crashed face first into the canvas and just stayed there, eyes glassy, body twitching slightly. The referee counted him out at 2:59, but honestly, everyone knew it was over the moment he hit the floor. Medical teams rushed in immediately because this wasn't just a knockout. This was the kind of thing that makes you fear for a man's life. Pacquiao was unconscious for what felt like an eternity, and the entire arena, the entire world watching on pay-per-view, held their breath. The aura of invincibility that Pacquiao had built over a decade, gone in one punch. That's boxing for you, a split-second shift from total dominance to complete devastation. Speaking of devastating counters that came out of nowhere, our next entry features another moment where a fighter walked right into disaster. Manny Pacquiao KO Ricky Hatton. Here's the wild thing about boxing. Sometimes the same guy who gets knocked out cold ends up delivering one of the scariest knockouts ever to someone else. Before Marquez turned out his lights, Pacquiao did the exact same thing to Ricky Hatton, and honestly, it might have been even more terrifying to watch. Hatton came into this fight as a heavy favorite. The British brawler was beloved, tough as nails, and had this warrior reputation that made him seem almost unbreakable. But from the opening bell, something was wrong. Pacquiao's speed was just different, like Hatton was fighting in slow motion while Manny was operating in fast forward. Those sharp left hands kept buckling Hatton's knees over and over, and you could see the confidence draining from his face round by round. Then, round 2 came, and boxing history got made. A devastating left cross caught Hatton flush on the chin, and I mean flush. Like Pacquiao couldn't have placed it better if he had a GPS system. Hatton didn't just fall, he crashed backward into the canvas with this sickening thud that made everyone watching wince. His body went rigid, his eyes rolled back. He was completely out cold for over a minute while the entire arena sat in stunned silence. Referee Vic Drakulich waved it off, but Hatton was still convulsing slightly on the canvas as medics worked to stabilize him. That knockout led to a long hiatus for Hatton, who battled depression afterward and eventually retired, haunted by what happened that night. Even warriors have limits, and Pacquiao found Hatton's in the most brutal way possible. But if you think that was hard to watch, wait until you see what happens when a referee doesn't stop a fight quickly enough. Mercer KO Tommy Morrison. Tommy Morrison was supposed to be the next big thing. Hollywood literally put him in Rocky V because he had that look, the blonde hair, the power, the undefeated record. He was eyeing heavyweight glory against veteran Ray Mercer, and everything was going according to script until round 5, when the script got completely thrown out the window and replaced with a horror movie. Morrison pressed forward aggressively on the ropes, trying to impose his will, and that's when Mercer loaded up a devastating right hook that changed everything. The punch didn't just drop Morrison, it propelled him halfway across the ring like he'd been hit by a truck. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. Morrison slammed into the opposite ropes, and instead of falling, his body got caught up in them. He was basically hanging there, limp, eyes completely vacant, unconscious but still upright. And Mercer kept punching because the referee didn't stop it. Morrison absorbed extra shots while dangling there like a puppet with cut strings, completely unable to defend himself. When he finally collapsed into a heap, he was out for minutes. Then came the seizure. Right there on the canvas, Morrison's body started convulsing while medical teams rushed to provide oxygen. The referee's delay in stopping that fight turned what would have been a bad knockout into something that bordered on tragedy. It derailed Morrison's career completely, and later events in his life would make this night seem like a dark omen of things to come. Sometimes the horror isn't about how hard the punch lands, it's about what happens to the body afterward. Nonito Donaire KO Fernando Montiel. You ever see something in the ring that makes you immediately think that person might be dying right now? Because that's exactly what went through everyone's mind at the MGM Grand when Nonito Donaire faced Fernando Montiel for the WBC bantamweight belt. Montiel was a two-division champion, not some not some stepping stone, a legitimate, proven fighter at the highest level. Donaire's power was special though, and in round 2, everyone found out just how special. A left hook staggered Montiel against the ropes, setting up a follow-up straight right that detonated on Montiel's chin like someone had planted explosives there. Montiel dropped flat on his back with his arms flailing wildly, but that wasn't the scary part. The scary part was what came next. Montiel's body started convulsing violently. His legs were kicking. His torso was arching. It looked like a seizure. And honestly, that's basically what it was. His brain's way of responding to the trauma it had just received. The entire arena went completely silent as medics swarmed in. Montiel lay there twitching for over 2 minutes, while Donaire knelt nearby in prayer, visibly shaken by what his fists had done. The good news? Montiel recovered, but those unnatural, almost animalistic spasms on the canvas, those images stuck with everyone who watched. It was a brutal reminder that the human brain isn't designed to get hit like that, no matter how tough you think you are. And speaking of one punch completely shutting someone down, our next entry features a knockout so clean it was almost surgical. Sergio Martinez KO Williams. Paul Williams was the kind of fighter who made opponents question their career choices. Long, rangy, tough, durable. The man had a chin like granite and the reach to keep you at the end of his punches all night. In their first fight, Williams beat Martinez by decision. So when the rematch for the WBC middleweight title came around, everyone expected another war of attrition. They got a war for about 5 minutes. Then they got silence. Round 2. Williams advances forward the same way he always did. Confident, aggressive, looking to establish his range. Martinez, the southpaw, times the advance perfectly and uncorks a laser-precise overhand left that catches Williams flush on the jaw. And here's the thing that made this knockout so uniquely terrifying. Williams didn't flail. He didn't convulse. He didn't do anything at all. He just turned off, like someone had hit a light switch. His eyes went wide with shock, and then his body crumpled, falling face up without a single twitch afterward. He lay there perfectly still for the full count, pulse faint, while ringside doctors genuinely worried for a moment that they might be dealing with cardiac arrest. Martinez paced anxiously, clearly disturbed by what he was witnessing. It took 90 seconds to revive Williams. 90 seconds of everyone in that building wondering if they'd just watched a man die. The knockout shifted the entire middleweight division, but more than that, it reminded everyone that boxing's one-punch lethality is very, very real. Sometimes the horror isn't in the violence, it's in the absolute silence that follows. Alexander Frankle KO McCarinelli. Enzo McCarinelli was the cruiserweight champion, defending his title on home turf in Wales against unbeaten German Alexander Frankle. Home crowd advantage, champion's confidence. Everything set up for a successful defense. But boxing doesn't care about your setup. Round 4. Frankle's pressure had been mounting all fight, and then he landed a clubbing right that rocked McCarinelli against the ropes. What came next was the kind of thing that makes you physically recoil from your screen. A second flush hook connected, and I'm not exaggerating when I say you could see McCarinelli's skull visibly deforming on impact. The human head is not supposed to move like that. It's not supposed to compress like that. He slid down the ropes in slow motion, body completely limp, landing in a twisted heap without any movement whatsoever. The crowd gasped collectively as he lay there comatose for minutes, medical teams scrambling while fearing the worst, fatal brain swelling. McCarinelli survived, thankfully, but he was never the same fighter afterward. That knockout exposed something fundamental about his durability, and he eventually retired. But the visual, that haunts people. A fighter's head compressing like putty on impact is something you can't unsee, and it serves as a stark warning about just how much force these punches carry. Speaking of punches carrying too much force, what happens when the size difference between fighters is criminally mismatched? Arturo Gatti KOs Gamache. This one makes me angry, honestly, because this wasn't just a horrifying knockout. This was a preventable tragedy caused by negligent sanctioning. Arturo Gatti outweighed Joey Gamache by 19 pounds, despite this supposedly being a catchweight bout at welterweight limits. 19 pounds. In a sport where punches land on your brain, someone in the commission should have gone to jail for approving this. Gatti dominated from the opening bell because of course he did. He had nearly 20 extra pounds of muscle and bone behind every punch. In round 2, he unleashed a barrage that culminated in a left hook exploding on Gamache's temple. Gamache's body went rigid immediately, crashing backward onto the canvas with that sickening thud that tells you something is very wrong. Then came the convulsions. Then came the foaming at the mouth. The size disparity didn't just contribute to the knockout, it amplified the brain trauma to dangerous levels. Gamache was rushed to the hospital where they discovered detached retinas and brain damage. He sued the promoters for negligence, and honestly, he should have won more than he did. That knockout ended Gamache's career and highlighted everything wrong with weight enforcement in boxing at the time. It wasn't entertainment, it was exploitation. It wasn't a fair fight. It was a mismatch that put a man's life at risk for profit. Sometimes the most horrifying moments in boxing aren't about what happens inside the ring. They're about what happens outside it that allows dangerous situations to occur. Alan Green KO KOs Codrington. This fight wasn't a main event. It wasn't a title fight. It was a super middleweight showbox bout that most viewers barely registered until suddenly everyone was watching. It took less than 20 seconds. Right from the opening bell, Alan Green closed the distance. He backed KOs Codrington toward the ropes and unleashed a short, explosive left hook. Codrington never saw it. The punch landed flush and his body went limp instantly. What followed was shocking. Codrington collapsed backward and fell awkwardly through the ropes, landing hard on the canvas outside the ring. He was completely unresponsive. The referee waved it off immediately as ringside officials and medical staff rushed in. For a few terrifying moments, the arena went quiet. Fans believed they had just witnessed something catastrophic. Codrington lay motionless as doctors stabilized him and placed him on a stretcher. He was quickly transported to a hospital for emergency evaluation. Thankfully, the worst fears didn't come true. Codrington regained consciousness, underwent scans, and doctors later confirmed there was no life-threatening injury. He was released after observation and went on to make a full recovery. Green, for his part, showed restraint. There was no wild celebration, only concern as officials focused entirely on Codrington's condition. The knockout became infamous, replayed endlessly, and later recognized as one of the most devastating knockouts ever aired on television, even earning Knockout of the Year honors. Codrington did return to boxing afterward, but the image of his body collapsing through the ropes remains burned into the sport's collective memory, not because someone died, but because, for a moment, it looked like they might have. Norton KO Jerry Cooney. Jerry Cooney was the Great White Hope, and yeah, I'm using those words deliberately because that's exactly how he was marketed in 1982. The heavyweight division was dominated by black fighters, and promoters saw dollar signs in Cooney's Irish-American image. He faced veteran Ken Norton in a non-title bout at Madison Square Garden with everything to prove. Norton was old but crafty. He spent 9 rounds targeting Cooney's body relentlessly, sapping his power punch by punch, making each round feel longer than the last. By round 10, Cooney was running on empty. That's when Norton found his opening, a chopping right to the head that sent Cooney reeling into the ropes. He collapsed in a heap with his legs buckling grotesquely underneath him, lying semi-conscious and completely disoriented. And here's where it gets worse. Norton pounced with ground shots before the referee finally mercifully stopped it. The stoppage was late. Everyone knew it was late. Cooney was incoherent for a long time after the final bell. The knockout shattered Cooney's hype and exposed his chin, but more than that, it showed the ugly side of how boxing promotes fights along racial lines and then fails to protect fighters when things go wrong. Speaking of fighters who seemed destined for greatness until one punch changed everything. Julian Jackson, KO Harold Graham. This knockout defies logic. It defies everything you think you know about how boxing works. Harold Graham was outboxing Julian Jackson so thoroughly that the doctor was warning about stopping the fight because Jackson's eyes were swelling shut. Graham was winning every exchange, dominating every round, cruising toward a WBC middleweight title that seemed like a foregone conclusion. Round 4. Jackson, barely able to see, retreats toward the ropes. Graham, confident and perhaps a little careless, follows him in. And that's when Jackson threw it. A monstrous right hook from somewhere in the vicinity of the shadow realm. The punch crashed into Graham's unprotected chin with physics-defying power. Graham's head snapped back. His body went airborne. When he hit the canvas, he bounced. Actually bounced. And when he settled, his eyes were rolled back white and he wasn't moving. He lay there paralyzed for minutes, convulsing faintly while medics feared coma and the crowd sat in absolute silence. Graham suffered amnesia afterward and eventually retired. The knockout defined Julian Jackson's one-punch terror for the rest rest of his career. But more than that, it became pure nightmare fuel. Proof that in boxing, you can be dominating a fight completely and still lose everything in an instant. Now, let's talk about another upset that nobody saw coming, except this time it happened to the heavyweight champion of the world. Rahman KOs Lewis. Lennox Lewis was the dominant heavyweight champion of the world, technically superior, physically imposing, seemingly invincible. His fight against Rahman in South Africa was supposed to be a tune-up, a showcase, an easy night before bigger challenges. Rahman was a 15-1 underdog. Nobody gave him a chance. Round 5 changed everything. Lewis threw a jab, just a jab, nothing special, and Rahman timed it perfectly, countering with a seismic right cross that connected directly with Lewis's temple. The sound was different. Everyone in the building heard it. And then Lennox Lewis, the unstoppable champion, had his knees shatter beneath him. He toppled sideways like a felled tree, crashing unconscious into the canvas without any attempt at recovery. He stayed down for 30 seconds while medics swarmed and the boxing world collectively lost its mind. The upset stunned everyone. Lennox Lewis, out cold, defeated by a thunderbolt from obscurity. Lewis would avenge the loss later because champions do what champions do. But that night in South Africa exposed something fundamental. Even kings can be dethroned by a single punch. Even invincibility is an illusion. And speaking of aging fighters defying the odds, our next entry features one of the most iconic knockouts in heavyweight history. George Foreman KO Michael Moorer. 45 years old. Let that sink in for a second. George Foreman was 45 years old, chasing history against undefeated champion Michael Moorer in a heavyweight unification bout that everyone expected him to lose. Moorer was younger, faster, and had been outboxing Foreman for 9 rounds. The judges had it lopsided. Foreman needed a knockout to win. Round 10. Foreman, patient as a hunter, stalked forward. He feinted once, twice, drawing Moorer in just slightly, and then he threw it. A short, apocalyptic right hand that detonated on Moorer's chin with every pound of Big George's 250-pound frame behind it. Moorer folded backward onto the ropes. He slid down in stages, eyes completely blank, like someone was slowly deflating him. Foreman roared in triumph. He had just become the oldest heavyweight champion in history. But while the world celebrated an incredible sports moment, Moorer lay motionless on the canvas, suffering whiplash trauma from the force of that punch. It's iconic. It's legendary. It's also terrifying when you watch the replay and realize just how much damage that punch did. Age-defying power proving boxing's timeless brutality condensed into one perfect, devastating moment. Speaking of devastating moments from prime era fighters, let's talk about Iron Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson KOs Frazier. Young Mike Tyson was something the heavyweight division had never seen before. Speed and power that seemed like they came from different human beings somehow combined in one terrifying package. When he faced Marvis Frazier, Joe Frazier's son, in a heavyweight eliminator, everyone expected violence. Nobody expected it to happen in 30 seconds. From the opening bell, Tyson swarmed relentlessly. No feeling out process, no respect for his opponent, just destruction. A left hook staggered Frazier against the ropes before he even knew what fight he was in. Then came the follow-up right uppercut, and I want you to picture this. That punch literally lifted Frazier's head skyward. His body exploded backward like he'd been hit by a car. He crashed down convulsing. His legs were bicycling wildly in seizure. He was unconscious before he even hit the canvas. 30 seconds. That's all it took for Tyson to completely demolish a professional heavyweight and leave him seizing on the floor. Frazier retired after that night. The knockout foreshadowed Tyson's reign of terror through the heavyweight division, but it also horrified everyone who watched with its sheer speed and savagery. Iron Mike wasn't just beating opponents, he was destroying them. But Tyson's most horrifying moment wasn't a knockout at all. We'll get to that one later. Gervonta Davis KO Leo Santa Cruz. Halloween night, a super fight between two of the best fighters in the lighter weight classes. Gervonta Davis's terrifying power against Leo Santa Cruz's relentless volume. The WBA lightweight title on the line. Everything set up for a classic. Round 6. The tension had been building for 5 rounds of tactical warfare. Davis slipped a jab, routine defensive maneuver, and then unleashed something that was absolutely not routine. A piston-like left uppercut that drilled through Santa Cruz's guard and connected forehead first with such precision you could hear the impact through your TV speakers. Santa Cruz dropped flat on his back amid the ropes and immediately began writhing in agony. His body was arching. Blood started pooling. The medical assessment afterward confirmed a concussion and orbital fracture. His face had been structurally damaged by a single punch. Davis stood there looking somber, the celebration muted by the realization of what he'd just done. A festive Halloween night had turned grim in seconds. The knockout validated Davis's threat as one of boxing's most dangerous punchers, but it also reignited all those conversations conversations about weight class dangers and just how thin the line is between spectacular and tragic. Speaking of thin lines between triumph and tragedy, our next entry features boxing's bronze bomber, Deontay Wilder KO Luis Ortiz. Deontay Wilder had one marketable skill, and he marketed it better than anyone: the ability to end your night with one punch. Luis Ortiz was supposed to be the slick Cuban technician who would expose Wilder's flaws, take away his power, and prove that skill beats strength. For 6 rounds, that's exactly what was happening. Ortiz was winning the fight. Then, round 7 happened. Ortiz pressed forward, confident in his momentum, and Wilder loaded up that overhand right that had ended so many careers. It breached Ortiz's guard explosively, finding its target with devastating accuracy. What happened next looked like something from a movie. Ortiz folded at the waist, his knees buckled, and then he tumbled sideways in a heap like a building being demolished. He lay semi-conscious, twitching, while Wilder celebrated what would become one of his signature victories. The punch's arc evoked guillotine finality. One moment you're in a competitive fight, the next moment you're lying on the canvas wondering what planet you're on. Ortiz survived, but was never quite the same fighter afterward. The knockout amplified Wilder's one-shot mythos to legendary status. The slow crumble, like a tower imploding under precise demolition, became one of the most replayed knockouts of the modern era. Now we move from terrifying knockouts to something far more tragic. Moments where fighters didn't just lose fights, but lost their lives. Benny Paret, death versus Emil Griffith. Before this fight even started, the seeds of tragedy were planted. During the pre-fight rituals, Benny Paret made a decision that would cost him everything. He taunted Emil Griffith with a gay slur. In 1962, in front of cameras, in front of the world. Griffith internalized that rage, channeled it, and brought it into Madison Square Garden for their welterweight title rematch. Round 12. Griffith had trapped Paret on the ropes, and what happened next became boxing's deadliest moment ever broadcast on television. 29 consecutive punches, 29 unanswered hooks to the head, while Paret slumped lifelessly, unable to defend himself, unable to fall because the ropes held him up. Referee Ruby Goldstein finally intervened, but by then it was far too late. Paret never regained consciousness. He died 10 days later from brain hemorrhage while the nation watched, debated, and mourned. The tragedy birthed immediate reforms: 3 knockdown rules, standing 8 counts, better referee training. Boxing had to change because it had killed a man on live TV. Emil Griffith was haunted for the rest of his life. He attempted suicide. He never fully recovered from what his fists had done, and Paret's widow filed lawsuits that resulted in settlements acknowledging what everyone already knew. This should never have happened. The ultimate horror of this moment wasn't just the violence, it was how verbal provocation ignited fatal fury, exposing the psychological depths that make this sport so dangerous. Duke Koo Kim death versus Ray Mancini. Ray Mancini was defending his WBA lightweight title against a Korean underdog named Duck Koo Kim. The fight was broadcast live to millions. Kim had written in his notebook before the fight, "Kill or be killed." He would tragically fulfill half of that statement. For 13 rounds, these two warriors beat each other senseless in one of the most brutal title fights ever witnessed. Round 14. Mancini pinned Kim on the ropes and unleashed a left hook flurry directly to the head. Kim collapsed. His body started seizing violently on the canvas. Medics rushed in, but he was already gone. His brain was bleeding and nothing could stop it. Duke Koo Kim slipped into a coma and died 6 days later from subdural hematoma. He was 23 years old. He left behind a pregnant widow who would never see her husband again. But the tragedy didn't stop there. Kim's mother, unable to cope with her son's death, took her own life a year later. The shockwaves from this fight changed boxing forever. The sport went from 15-round championship fights to 12-round limits. Medical protocols were enhanced worldwide. Ray Mancini spiraled into depression and spent years advocating for fighter safety, trying to find meaning in the worst moment of his career. A champion's glory forever tainted by youth sacrifice. This is the fight that literally altered how boxing is structured. Gerald McClellan brain damage versus Nigel Benn. Gerald McClellan was a destroyer, a super middleweight with heavyweight power who had knocked out most of his opponents and was widely considered one of the most dangerous fighters on the planet. Nigel Benn was the British warrior who would face anyone, anywhere. Their clash in London was expected to be brutal. It exceeded all expectations in the worst possible way. For 10 rounds, these two tried to end each other. Round 10 turned savage. Benn landed a right cross that dropped McClellan, who rose wobbly but somehow standing. A follow-up hook dropped him again. He staggered up up, but something was wrong. He was blind in one eye, and the referee delayed stopping the fight. Then McClellan collapsed, not from a punch, from what was happening inside his skull. Detached retinas, a stroke. His brain was hemorrhaging while millions watched. Helpless, Gerald McClellan woke up from his coma paralyzed, blind, and speech-impaired. His career wasn't just over. His life, as he knew it, was over. He remains dependent on care to this day. Nigel Benn retired, riddled with guilt. The fight prompted mandatory brain scans in the UK, but those reforms came too late for McClellan. A prime destroyer reduced to dependency. A man who once struck terror into opponents, now unable to care for himself. This is what boxing can take from you. Jimmy Doyle, death versus Sugar Ray Robinson. This story starts with a nightmare, a literal nightmare. Before the fight, Sugar Ray Robinson dreamed that he killed Jimmy Doyle in the ring. The dream disturbed him so deeply that he tried to cancel the fight. Priests had to convince him otherwise. They told him it was just a dream. It meant nothing. It meant everything. In Cleveland for the welterweight title, Doyle pressed early against Robinson, but the counters kept coming. Round 8. A left hook staggered Doyle. A right follow-up dropped him face down, lifeless. The referee stopped it at 2:03, but Jimmy Doyle would never stand up again. He died hours later from a brain clot. He was 22 years old. Robinson was devastated. He donated his entire purse to Doyle's family. He visited them personally, but more than anything, he was haunted. A prophetic nightmare had manifested into reality. He had dreamed of killing a man and then actually killed him. The guilt never fully left. The tragedy spurred early stoppage rules and changed how referees approached fighter safety, but nothing could undo what happened that night in Cleveland. Eerie horror blending fate and ferocity into one of boxing's darkest chapters. And now, for our #1 entry, we leave tragedy behind for something that was somehow both horrifying and absurd at the same time. Mike Tyson bites Evander Holyfield. Look, after everything we've discussed, deaths, brain damage, paralysis, seizures, you might wonder how a bite could be the most horrifying moment in boxing history. But when you watch it back, and when you really sit with what happened that night, you understand why this moment broke something fundamental about how we view the sport. Evander Holyfield had been headbutting Tyson repeatedly throughout their heavyweight rematch. Intentionally or not, those heads clashes were opening cuts and enraging the former champion. By round 3, Tyson had snapped. He spat out his mouthpiece. He lunged forward, and then he bit a chunk out of Evander Holyfield's right ear. Blood poured. Holyfield recoiled in shock and pain, hopping around the ring with part of his ear missing. Referee Mills Lane deducted points and warned Tyson. The fight resumed. And then, impossibly, unbelievably, Tyson bit the left ear moments later. He literally spat flesh onto the canvas. Mills Lane immediately disqualified him. Holyfield needed stitches. Tyson was banned for a year and fined $3 million. His career went into freefall. But more than that, boxing's image took a hit it never fully recovered from. This was supposed to be two gladiators competing at the highest level. Instead, it became cannibalism on pay-per-view. The bite fight exposed unchecked rage's abyss. It showed what happens when a fighter loses all control, all humanity, all connection to the sport's code, from gladiators to savages in 60 seconds. That's why it tops our list, not because of the physical damage, but because of what it represented. Thanks for watching. If you had a good time, keep the adventure alive by clicking on one of the suggested videos on your screen right now for more amazing content.